What's up, everyone? How you guys doing? Today we need to talk about Black Knight. Black Knight is a good character. All right. For those of you watching me on stream, I made a lot of jokes about how Black Knight is a pretty useless character nowadays. Um, Obviously that's for jokes. It's a lot. It's a little bit exaggerated because I'm on stream and everything to entertain the people. However, besides all the exaggeration, I do think that Black Knight has dropped off in recent times. Now, this is not a video about me doom posting about Black Knight saying that he's bad. This is not me. That's not the point of this video. I still think that Black Knight, even though he's not a top 5 character, maybe not a top 20, he still is a pretty good character. That being said, I think that, or at least the goal of this video is to educate or to tell you guys the design of Black Knight's kit and how that design of Black Knight's kit has for better or for worse impacted him negatively in the meta. And so you look at his kit, his stats and everything. And obviously, as the day of this recording, 15th of August, Gold has just been released. But even before the Annihilators were announced, I think that the problems with Black Knight's kit was already there. It's just that we did not find it out until recently. So before we carry on, do take note that I stream live on Twitch, the description below, and let's get started. His kit is pretty long. I'll just keep this as short as possible. Pre-taunting tank spawns with defense up of 2 turns, immunity, and 5 charges. The defense up is pretty important because it gives him extra resistance, which means that you almost exclusively have to use a character like BTS or Void Knight with extra focus in the kit, or even Vulture to flip them. And even in those cases, you might need to switch them to Skirmisher just for the extra focus. The second part that's important to his kit is the charge mechanic. So basically, when Black Knight has charged and does not have exhausted, he basically retaliates based on his max HP. So Black Knight does have a very high HP stat, as we'll talk about later, and unrevivable, unavoidable, cannot be blocked, gains focus. And the focus helps you to land the heal, block, trauma, and the bleeds as well. So unless you are sacking it or using Mephisto, which we'll talk about more later, he doesn't really have exhausted, especially in a game mode like Arena. And then so that means that the main thing about Black Knight is that he's giving constant pressure on the enemies, especially those who take a lot of turns, especially like Super Skrull. He was made as a soft counter to Super Skrull from the very start. And also when he loses his charges for the first time, he gains 100% speed bar, which we'll talk about later. And then the rest of his kit, so there are 2 things that are constant within his kit. One is the doing damage based on his max health. The other one, which is seen in his special and his basic special and ult, is this attack gaining piercing and equal to the character's bonus armor, which as a standalone character is about 40%. Gains more in war, so in war he hits a little bit harder. His special, he gains taunt, safeguard, and 2 charges. The thing about his charges is that before he takes his first turn, he obviously has 5 because he spawns with it. Once he takes his first turn, he can only gain a maximum of 3. So that's something to take note of. All right, unless obviously even if he takes first turn and he has 4, then that's like a special case. Or if he somehow goes first, then he still has the 5. But if he goes below 3, the more he goes below 3, he will only get a maximum of 3 at any time. So besides those things, he also gets speed up immunity. To take note that because he spawns with 2 turns of defense up, if you don't flip it, basically he will have 1 more turn of defense up as well, together with all these stats. All right. And also, as I said, he applies ability block, and also does additional damage, which is 40% as a standalone. And then his ult is basically primary and adjacent, does a lot of damage, does 500% piercing plus another 40%, and then also does 30% of this character's max health as well. And he gains a charge out of maximum of 3. Apply defense up once again, and then offense up to all brawler allies, which depending on who you're using will matter. And now, of course, his basic just puts deflect and clears positive, a random positive effect. So that's kind of the short form version of his kit. Before I carry on and talk about his stats, in my opinion, a character in Marvel Strike Force, whether they are good depends on three things. The first is his kit, the second is his stats, and the third is the environment that the character is being placed in. All right, and so we talk about the stats. All right, I'm not going to really search for his stats, but basically, as of this current moment, as of the recording of this video, Black Knight has the 9th highest health, 81st highest damage, 9th highest armor, 117th highest focus, and the 13th highest resistance in the game out of all the 200 plus characters. If I'm not wrong, it's 292 characters, including the unreleased Thanos, right? And it just goes to show that how good he is based on on his stats. You know, you look at his health, right? Even though he's 9th highest, he was actually the 2nd highest in the game, just behind Super Skrull. If you were at the point of release, everyone above him is either reworked or newly released. If you were to look at his armor, he's also 2nd highest, just behind Ms. Marvel Heartlight. Everybody else, like Penny onwards, were either reworked or just released. And for resistance, he was the 5th highest, all right, just behind characters like Jessica Jones, obviously, Zombie Juggernaut, Morgan Le Fay, and Teen Loki, right over here. Teen Loki, Black Knight. All right, so looking at this, we can see that Black Knight has a very powerful kit. And then we can see that Black Knight has a very good has very good stats, right? It fulfills the first 2 or the 3 requirements that I mentioned. And then what about the environment? All right, the environment in this case refers to the game modes of Marvel Strike Force. So you have Arena, Raids, War, Crucible, and for all intents and purposes, Dark Dimension as well, because it's almost a yearly thing at this point in time. Looking at some of these game modes, all right, obviously Black Knight was made for Arena and for War, and so he excelled a lot in these modes. And the same can be said about Crucible. Even though he's not a Crucible character, many players have to work around Black Knight because of the amount of damage that he does. And so in these 3 game modes, Black Knight was one of the best characters from release and even up to now. All right, because the environment suited Black Knight, because these 3 game modes just happen to be 5v5 game modes. All right, it just happened that he spawned with 5 charges because he excels against 5v5. Even if those 5 characters were to go first before Black Knight, he was able to retaliate and put pressure on these enemies when they took their turns. All right, and then he's able to constantly keep up. So even if he has 3 charges, he's just retaliating against 3 out of 5. That is still a 60% pressure rate against these enemies. Now, what about the other game modes? What about Raids and Dark Dimension? And then that's where you see that's where you start to see some chinks in his armor, right? Raids, yes, first and foremost, I understand he's not a raid character, he shouldn't be excelling in raids. But if you look at Skrull is plug and play in bio. If you look at Old Man Logan, also plug and play in Mutant. But why isn't Black Knight as plug and play in skill? Like, yes, Spell Society is superly strong, but why wouldn't you replace a character like Gwen and put in Black Knight instead? And I think that's where you can start to see some of the issues with Black Knight, because the charge mechanic only has 5 at the start and 3 eventually. The more enemies that Black Knight faces, Black Knight starts to struggle. All right, talking about raids are not a 5v5 game mode. Some waves in raids will have 7 or 8 enemies, and then keeping up the pressure of trying to counter attack against them eventually isn't going to be feasible, because eventually he's going to lose that charge. And yes, he does get 100%, but eventually he's going to lose that charge again in a game mode where you take at least a few minutes. And even if you were to think about it, right? How many of you have taken out of time in war in a very, very huge punch up? And eventually, once all the charges are gone and once all the benefits of out of time are gone, right? And then when you start to fight against characters who are still able to survive against the amount of damage that Black Knight is dealing, then you start to realize that Black Knight starts to wane in power. And the same thing can be seen in raids. Yes, and I understand the argument. Raids is not Black Knight, what was Black Knight designed for. So I'm willing to let that slide. But then if you look at Dark Dimension, right? Dark Dimension, how many of you have taken Black Knight into Dark Dimension 7 and felt that he was underwhelming? You felt that he was the weakest link in his team. Yes, he tanked a lot of damage for the teams for the rest of them to survive. But because of that, how many of you had Black Knight die first before any of the action carried on? All right, I've seen people on stream take Black Knight into the global notes of DD7 and seen that CGR one-shot him off the bat. All right, and I think that, and of course that could be a case of Scopely boosting the stats of a Dark Dimension character. But then, even if you take away that aspect of it, right? Personally, I felt that Black Knight either was just sitting there as a duck, as a white elephant, or he just died easily. And I think that that's where Black Knight's value does, Black Knight's weaknesses start to show, because as I mentioned, Black Knight cannot handle against teams that's or in game modes where he has to face more than 5 enemies, because his charge mechanic cannot keep up in the long run, right? His charge mechanic cannot keep up in long fights, and at the same time, and he excels in short fights definitely, but not every game mode is designed for a short fight. Some game modes are long, and Black Knight just doesn't have the strength because of his reliance on the charge mechanic to push through. And so I think that that is where he falters, right? Black Knight just doesn't do well in long form fights or against multiple enemies. So now your argument may be, okay, since he doesn't do well in like 1 or 2 game modes, but he does well in 3 game modes, right? And that's where we start to see problems. Now, the first thing you need to talk about is obviously Arena, all right? The exhaust mechanic. We know that after he was released, Mephisto was announced and released for DD7. And the thing about Mephisto is that he applies exhausted, which is mostly for Arena, because obviously you can't sack in Arena. You can put exhausted on them. But Mephisto just does that off the bat. He's able to put exhausted on the enemy so that your Black Knight is basically deemed useless from there on out. And so yeah, but that's maybe just for Arena, and is a game of haves and have-nots. But the problem is that because Mephisto is in the game, and while only 1,000 players have Mephisto, eventually more players will have Mephisto. So while it is not a problem for you now, it may be a problem for you eventually. And that is the thing about these Dark Dimension characters. Yes, you may not face them today, but down the road, a few weeks, even a month or so, you will face a Mephisto. So I think it's something for us to be aware of as we play the game. That being said, it's just one character, and in other game modes, people probably will have Mephisto on defense as well, right? So maybe in Arena he doesn't do that well. What about in War and in Crucible? So a few weeks ago, all right, 4 weeks ago, on the 17th of July, I made this video, all right, where I titled it as Mysterio neuters Black Knight. All right, this is not an original like theory crafter idea. Where I'm not going to take credit for that. This came in from an idea where people use a similar counter in War. All right, in War they will use Superior 6 with Mysterio and Mr. Sinister. against our time. And the whole concept was that the clones will eat up the charges from Black Knight so that he won't be able to retaliate, and then he'll just be standing there as a duck, all right, as a sitting duck. And I took that idea and ran with it, all right. So I used to, because people are putting him on defense mostly with Spy Society. What I did was that I used the Superior 6 either with Lizard or Vulture, with Mysterio, and then basically use the clones to eat up his charges as much as possible. So yeah, as you see right there, one of the clones start eating his charges, but because he's a clone, it doesn't really matter. It's not one of my 5 main characters. And then he doesn't do anything. I'm able to put ability block both with Craven and with Mysterio. I'm able to control him. And I don't know whether it says right at the beginning, but this is a 500k fight. I've done 700k. I've done 1 million punch-ups with this team. Like I said, I prefer Vulture, but even with Mysterio, even with Lizard, I'm able to punch up that high because I expose the mechanic of Black Knight to my benefit. I changed the environment that Black Knight is facing. Instead of facing a 5v5 game mode, I changed this to a 5v10 game mode that changed Black Knight's whole dynamic. He is not able to keep up. Obviously, it kind of helped that Green Goblin's ultimate clears charges, but even if it did not, I would have been able to clear his charges through the Mysterio clones themselves, and then I will be able to then just basically, if you watch the fight, I basically control him, and then I just go for the other members. I didn't need to bother about him. The strongest threat on the strongest threat on the team has now been neutralized because of that. And so I think that and so there's an example of the environment change, the environment being a big disservice to Black Knight himself. All right, because of the change of, because of the environment that Black Knight is facing, the team that he's facing, the game mode that he's facing, he doesn't do well once there are more enemies that he can contain, which is why he doesn't do very well in Dark Dimension, because he's constantly facing 10 enemies that take multiple turns. He is constantly he doesn't do well in raids at all, even as a plug and play character, because he can't keep up with the amount of enemies that are spawned on the skill nodes. And so I think that my whole point of this video is me trying to say that I think that characters that are designed with a charge mechanic that is based on the enemies taking turns has a very, very fatal flaw. And that fatal flaw is that it cannot do well in game modes that have more than 5 enemies. And if you're hearing what I've just said, some of you may realize that this has already happened before. All right, this is nothing new to Black Knight, because this has already happened to Weaver. All right, when people took Weaver into DD6, when DD6 was new, people realized that Weaver wasn't as good as a character as she was initially. Some people say that, okay, maybe it's because outside of Crucible, she only gets 3 charges out of 5. But now that you think about it, she was arena meta for quite a while only having 3 charges. She was used quite a lot in War despite only having 3 charges. So why is it that when it comes to a long form game mode like raids, before Bifrost came out, when she was used in the Mystic raids, when she was used in the when she was used in DD6, that she struggled so much? And that's because her charge mechanic cannot keep up with the enemies that are on field. And that same thing is happening to Black Knight. All right, basically characters that rely on charge mechanics that or the charge mechanics relies on the enemy moving, or the enemy that they're facing struggles when you're facing against facing in game modes where there are more than the enemies that has been stipulated. In this case, 5 charges, but if there are more than 5 enemies, that's when Black Knight struggles, Weaver struggles as well. And this will continue to go on for future characters, unless those future characters get like 10 charges on spawn, right? And so I think that sorry, let me get this page up. And so I think that yes, Mephisto, Old Man Logan, right, they have come in recently, and even Gore. Yes, Gore does counter his kit directly, but even if these characters did not exist, if Gladiator did not exist, if the Annihilators did not exist, if Ultimus was not a rework, I think that the weaknesses of Black Knight was already there from the very I think that Black Knight's weakness were already there from the very start. It's just that Gore especially, and to a certain extent Gladiator through in Arena specifically, just expose this parts of his kits. Obviously, Gore having both the ability to remove charge on his special and his ultimate is pretty crazy. That being said, I think that instead of the Annihilators being the team that was built to counter Black Knight, I think the Annihilators were the final nail in Black Knight's coffin. That being said, Black Knight is still a very good character. All right, like I said, this is not a Doom post. In fact, I just hope that this video help enlighten you about understanding Black Knight's mechanics and how characters with similar mechanics, aka Weaver, and any future characters that have a similar mechanic of charge being of their charge mechanic of being affected by the enemy, the deficiencies that it will face. All right, it has happened once to Weaver, it has happened to Black Knight, and if any future character comes in the future, it may also have this similar effect. And so I think that, like I said, still a good character, still worthy to build, but I think that it's important for us to be wary once a character comes out with a kit that has a charge mechanic that is dependent on an enemy attacking them. And so I think I come to this end of this video. TLDR, build a Black Knight, but be careful of building him, because Black Knight has weaknesses, and the more characters are being released, the more the weaknesses are being either exposed or countered, right? Like I said, I've used Mysterio to great effect. The game already gives you 10 enemies in Dark Dimension, and I think that that being said, I'd like you to leave in the comments what your thoughts on Black Knight is at this current moment. Do you think he's still the best character in the game? Are you disappointed by him, or are you holding on to the last hope that he's still relevant, he's still strong, and that he will continue to be relevant for the long run? All right. And once again, do know that I stream live on Twitch, link in the description below, and if you like this video, comment, subscribe, share, all that good YouTube stuff. Until next time, see you guys in the next video. Stay healthy, stay safe, be good to yourselves and the people around you. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.